a.m. It's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yes, hello everybody, it's Patrick Christie's here with you on GB News, on your TV, online and of course your digital radio as well. There's no escaping us, but I hope you're all ready for a bumper news hour because that's exactly what I've got coming your way. Let's go nuclear, that's right, OK? Our top story today is Boris Johnson promising 700 million big ones for the Sizewell C nuclear power station project in Suffolk. He's using his final major policy announcement to send the eco-warriors into a radioactive meltdown, isn't he? Good on him, as far as I'm concerned. He claimed he was, quote, absolutely confident that it will get over the line in the next few weeks. Well, we'll have to see about that, won't we? But we here at GB News know that the cost of living crisis is a major issue for you. Will you heat? Will you eat? Will the Christmas tree lights indeed go on this year? Do you back nuclear? That's what we want to know. And it comes, of course, as Russia cuts off gas supplies to Europe. We'll be getting all of the reaction, see what we did there, to the new nuclear reactor in a big debate very, very shortly. But something else now. I feel the need for speed. No, it's not just a famous line from Top Gun, but now a possible reality on Britain's roads as well, as Tory leadership frontrunner Liz Truss has hinted that she could scrap mandatory speed limits on motorways if she becomes Prime Minister. So she told an audience of Conservative members at the final hustings last night that she was, quote, prepared to look at introducing a German-style system. Are you Autobahn or Autobahn? Yeah, these jokes don't write themselves. I drive a BMW, so I didn't actually realise that there was even a 70-mile-per-hour speed limit on the motorways, or indeed that my car has indicators. But can us Brits handle the freedom on our roads? And talking of the Germans, isn't it massively unpatriotic to have our Prime Minister rolling round in a German car? We're ditching a Jag for the Audi. Apparently, the British Prime Minister is currently driven around in a batch of Jaguar XJs, known as the Sentinel. But soon, it'll be the German Audi. But with Rolls-Royce and British steel, we'll show them why British is best. I'll be joined by Charlie Mullins on that debate as well, formerly off of Pimlico Plumbers, who I believe thinks that actually it's remarkably unpatriotic to ditch the Jag for a German whip, but I think there's some hypocrisy there because he wanted to drag us back into the EU, didn't he? But joining me for the next 2 hours is the wonderful author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. There she is. But first things first, it's the latest news with the radiant Polly.
Thanks very much, Patrick. Your top stories at just after 4 o'clock on GB News, and we begin with some breaking news. Police investigating the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt Corbell in Liverpool say 2 guns were used in the shooting. CCTV has now been released of the gunman running from the scene near the Knotty Ash area of the city. Little Olivia was killed when he chased his intended target into her home. Police say they weren't known to her family. 2 men were arrested on suspicion of murder last week, but they've been released on bail. Police appealing for any information to help with their investigation. Well, in other news today, I can tell you Boris Johnson has promised £700 million of funding for the Sizewell C nuclear power station in Suffolk. In his final major policy speech as Prime Minister, he said it was confident that he would get it over the line in the next few weeks. He believes it would be madness not to go ahead with the new power plant.
This project will create tens of thousands of jobs, but it will also power 6 million homes. That is roughly a fifth, 6 million homes, roughly a fifth of all the homes in the UK. So it will help to fix the energy needs, not just of this generation, but of the next. Renewables are not only helping us to defeat climate change, they're also helping to keep bills lower. Now, I say go nuclear and go large and go with Sizewell C.
Millions of households could face the biggest squeeze in living standards in over a century. The Resolution Foundation saying the number of people living in absolute poverty is set to rise by 3 million in the next few years. The think tank adds the real household disposable income is on course to fall by 10% over this year and next. The government says it's preparing to provide extra support once the new Prime Minister is in office. Conservative MP Mark Harper says Rishi Sunak plans to tackle inflation if he gets the top job.
Ripping inflation and not doing anything that risks making inflation worse. And his concern is that large unfunded tax cuts promised by his opponent in this contest would actually make inflation worse. That's not going to help families. So his focus is get inflation down, inflation that's being driven by global events, but get that down, stop it becoming embedded in the economy. That's how you help those 14 million families have a better quality of life.
Well, the Shadow Secretary for Business and Industry, Jonathan Reynolds, says businesses should be given relief to prevent knock-on costs to customers.
So the starting point should be cutting business rates. We would increase the threshold for small business rates, relief to £25,000. So you're immediately getting help and hope to people that there will be some relief on the bills they've got to pay. Say the fertiliser plants in this country, they're not running. They can't afford to run. So you're putting into next year the inflation, the cost of food going up even further because they can't operate because fertiliser will therefore be more expensive.
Well, meanwhile, Liz Truss has hinted at further cost of living support this winter should she become Prime Minister. Writing in The Sun, the Foreign Secretary claims if she becomes leader, there'll be no new taxes or energy rationing. Mr Sunak and Ms Truss took part in the final leadership hustings in front of Conservative members in London last night. The vote closes at 5 p.m. tomorrow. A team from the United Nations nuclear watchdog has arrived at the Zaporizhia power plant in Ukraine. Renewed shelling at Europe's largest nuclear site had delayed the visit of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Moscow and Kyiv have blamed each other for the shelling, fueling fears of a potential radiation disaster. Inspectors say their mission is to try and stabilise the situation and prevent a nuclear accident. Southern Pakistan is braced for yet more flooding as overflowing river water is expected to arrive from the north. A third of the country is already underwater. The UK Disasters Emergency Committee has launched an appeal urging people to donate whatever they can to help with the relief effort there. 6 million people are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. And tributes have been paid to the veteran broadcaster Bill Turnbull, who's died at the age of 66. The former BBC breakfast host was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2017. His family says he died at home in Suffolk following a challenging and committed fight against the disease. Former BBC co-host Susanna Reid described him as the kindest, funniest and most generous man in the business. That's your news update. I'm back in half an hour with the latest headlines. Now back to Patrick.
Good afternoon, everybody. Patrick Christie's here on GB News. Now, as Vladimir Putin turns off the taps to Europe, temporarily at least, the Prime Minister has made it his final act to boost the UK's energy security. So, speaking earlier in Suffolk, Boris Johnson announced £700 million worth of funding for the nuclear power plant Sizewell C. At a press conference, he explained why he believes nuclear is the future.
Our British energy security strategy, a Great British Nuclear, is rectifying the chronic mistakes of the past. And so I say to you with the prophetic candour and clarity of one who is about to hand over the torch of office, I say go nuclear and go large and go with Sizewell C.
Go big or go home from Boris Johnson there. The government has previously said the £20 billion power plant would take just under a decade to build and could power 6 million homes. But campaign group Stop Sizewell said the power station was a vanity project for the PM that his successor could consign to the bin. So, is nuclear the future and indeed money well spent? Joining me now for a head-to-head debate on this issue is Peter Wilkinson, the chairman and secretary of Together Against Sizewell C, and of course the director of Net Zero Watch as well. It's Benny Pizer. I'd like both of you to start really by stating your respective cases. Peter, I'll start with you. Why are you so against us solving the energy crisis?
It's not a question of being against solving the energy crisis. I want to solve it in a different way. I don't think the nuclear industry, or Sizewell C in particular, or Boris Johnson's energy security program of 24 gigawatts, which is a fantasy, is the way to solve the energy crisis. And indeed, we haven't got an energy crisis. We've got a cost of living crisis. There's plenty of energy around. There's more energy falling per square metre on the Earth's surface than we can ever possibly use. We have the technology to harness it as well. What we don't have is the political will to get on and deal with the demand side of the equation, drive down energy demand, and meet it with renewables and decentralisation and efficiencies.
OK, Benny, I'll bring you in now. This is Benny Pizer, of course, director of Net Zero Watch. Well, according to Peter, we don't need nuclear. Why do you think we do?
Well, I think there is absolutely no doubt that we will see a huge renaissance of nuclear energy, not just in Britain, all over Europe. We've seen this already with announcements in Japan and Germany, the two most anti-nuclear countries that have basically gone anti-nuclear in recent years. Germany, in particular, is facing even a worse energy crisis because they've shut down nuclear energy. So there's no doubt that the future will be nuclear energy, but it won't solve the energy cost crisis we're now facing because it takes 10 to 20 years to build these big nuclear power plants. But there might be, hopefully, small modular reactors coming online in coming years, smaller ones, safer ones, cheaper ones. That's what we need.
Obviously, our current Prime Minister has put his eggs in the big nuclear basket. You are saying that this problem could be solved alternatively. Well, come on then, solve the problem for us. What do we do without nukes?
Well, the first thing you've got to recognise is that the nuclear renaissance in the UK was announced by Tony Blair back in 2007, and his two planks of justifying that renaissance were energy security and a big contribution
what we do instead, then?
Reduction. Nuclear power. I beg your pardon?
Yeah, I get you. We haven't got time for you to go around the houses, Peter. What do we do instead?
Well,
what do we do instead of nuclear,
drive down the demand side of the equation. How many millions of acres of rooftops do we have in this photovoltaic start? If we drive down demand, we cut people's bills and we cut down the need to build useless nuclear power stations on unstable routes with huge environmental impacts to solve a problem that is there for us to solve from the other end of the telescope.
Just very quickly, Peter, because I'm not quite sure what your point is here. I want to go back to Benny so we can have this proper debate. If not nuclear, then what? Do we have solar panels everywhere? Do I have a desk made out of solar panels? Is that the best you've got?
No, that you're being silly now, aren't you? This is what happens on News, GB News. You've got your own agenda and you just want to bring me on.
I don't have any agenda. I'm here to get educated
on
it. And I'm not.
If you read something before we had this debate, why don't you
I'm asking you a question which you answer it.
Renewables. Go on to 100% Renewables website.
Right.
Read the reports about how we can find our way without nuclear power. Just answer me this question.
I'll tell you what, Peter. I'm going to pause you there because I don't know if you've ever actually watched TV before, but the point of getting a guest on is so they don't tell me to go and read something else afterwards. They tell the nation, OK? And if you're not going to answer it, then there you go.
The reason of getting a guest on is also to hear what they have to say and without interrupting them and let them develop an argument.
Well, on that note, then, Director of Net Zero Watch, Benny Pizer, can you just come back to whatever Peter was actually trying to say there? Are there better, safer alternatives?
I'm not trying to say thank you very much. Don't be so bloody dismissive.
OK, look, I've tried to ask you numerous times what your alternative is, and you told me to go and read something, so we'll get rid of you, I think. Can we keep Director of Watch Benny Pizer on? Thank you very much. I think what Peter was saying there was that there might be a safer, cleaner way of generating our energy for the nation. Is there?
Yeah, well, this is the pipe dream. This is the utopian dream that you can power a country like Britain with renewable energy alone. He mentioned 100% renewable. That's obviously not going to happen because, you know, what do you do when there is no sun? What do you do when there's no wind? And you can't use nuclear energy to back up renewables either, because you need power plants to, you know, ratchet up and ratchet down depending on the weather conditions. So this is, I mean, the Greens are finished on this. They've prevented and avoided and opposed nuclear energy for the last 40 years. I think that's gone forever. Every country in their right mind will go for nuclear. It won't solve the energy cost crisis in the short term, but that's the future, no doubt about it.
Just quickly, I mean, Peter obviously decided essentially not to be interviewed there, but I am going to ask you this. I'm going to try and put up his side of it. I mean, are there serious risks? I mean, people are very afraid of some kind of nuclear disaster in the UK. You know, is there any chance of that?
Yeah, of course. There's always a chance of an accident. We had, you know, a number of accidents. But we also know that the actual people affected by nuclear accidents is much, much lower than all the predictions. And there are about 500 nuclear power plants. They've been running for 30, 40 years. In the US, they're extending the life of nuclear power plants to 60 to 80 years. They are very, very secure. You can't rule out anything, but we can live with them pretty safely. The main question is actually not security. The main problem is that nuclear energy still remains fairly expensive to build. Once they're built, you know, you get for 40, 50, 60 years very cheap energy, but to build them is very expensive, and we need to bring down the cost.
Benny, thank you very much. Benny Pizer there from Net Zero Watch. We had, for a while at least, Peter Wilkinson as well, who's chairman and secretary of Together Against Sizewell C. I would like to apologise there, especially to our younger viewers, for a little bit of flagrant language on Peter's behalf there, so I hope you're not too easily offended by all of that. Someone who definitely isn't easily offended by anything is the wonderful Christine Hamilton. How are you? So, look, let's just get back to basics on this particular thing then. Do you back nuclear? And why?
Absolutely. Yes, I do. On the question of nuclear, I don't know why Boris, for example, he said that about Sizewell, which is great. And one of your guests, I can't remember, it was Benny, said, why don't we do smaller nuclear power stations? Why we haven't been doing that for a while, I don't know, because one big, huge one is too expensive. But why are we still importing chips from America to fuel the Drax power station when literally yards away in Yorkshire, there is coal? Why don't we do that? And why don't we get fracking and everything else? But of course, I'm in favour of nuclear. Yes, it's the way forward. OK, now Tom Harwood joins us now, political correspondent who's been itching to get involved for us. I want you to give us the political reaction to this, because some people say this is just kind of tokenism from Boris Johnson. He's on the way out. He's going to kind of build this thing, a big announcement. This is Boris all over it, a golden age. Actually, is it practically possible? Will it get through?
Well, it will get through, and there is a large political consensus now in a way that there hasn't been a political consensus on this issue for the last 2 decades. It's not very far that you have to go back to see the Liberal Democrats campaigning against nuclear power stations, the Labour Party not building any nuclear power stations in their 13 years in office, and indeed David Cameron and Theresa May equivocating over building nuclear power stations. So really, in recent years, we've seen a greater consensus come forward, the Conservatives in favour of it, actually to their credit, the Labour Party as well, after COP26 saying that they do back nuclear as well as part of this energy mix. It's a smart move from Boris Johnson today, because we've all seen these sort of old videos of politicians a decade or so ago saying, we can't possibly build nuclear, it's not a solution, it won't be on stream until 2021. Well, if only they'd made that decision back a decade ago. So I think that Boris Johnson made a smart decision today, because a decade from now, people will be looking back at his speech today saying, thank goodness that station was built.
Absolutely. So Boris will have a statue in Kiev and no doubt as well a nuclear reactor named after him.
And
Very quickly,
he can be invited back to open it.
He could be. Cut the ribbon. Exactly, there we go. Stay where you are, Christine. Of course, you're not going anywhere. You're with me throughout the show because we're sticking with... OK, that's a different show. So we are sticking with politics here, from our current Prime Minister and one of his big announcements in office to the two candidates looking to take over his job. It's nearly crunch time. I, for one, cannot wait for this sorry saga to be over. The final Conservative leadership hustings took place last night as the race for number 10 finally winds down. Liz Truss ruled out energy rationing and vowed not to introduce any new taxes, while Rishi Sunak said that nothing should be taken off the table. Bit wishy-washy, if you ask me. But Liz Truss also set out her stance on the worrying crime statistics and, of course, low conviction rates in the UK.
We have seen crime go up. We have seen some appalling crimes committed. I'm afraid that too often women and girls in London are not able to go out for fear of crime, and I think that is wrong. And I will make sure our police are policing the streets and not policing Twitter.
OK, bit of trust there. Now, former Chancellor Rishi Sunak gave a personal message to his plan to tackle crime. Listen to this.
I will do whatever it takes to ensure that my two young daughters grow up in a society where it is safe for them to walk on the streets at night. Whether it is using stop and search or tackling the heinous grooming gangs, I will never let political correctness stand in the way of keeping us safe.
Yes, well, let's just lead in a little bit with what Rishi Sunak had to say there. Tom Harwood is back with us. It's almost like he never left. Tom, we saw there classic politician stuff. Bringing in his daughters, it's almost son of a bus driver territory at this point, isn't it? Bringing in his daughters, and then he kind of followed it up by saying, you know, he wants to make sure they're safe on the streets. Things like stop and search, not letting political correctness get in the way of that. What did you make of all that? Go down well?
Well, Rishi Sunak was on home turf last night. He's not polling terribly well in this leadership race, but the areas he's doing best in are London and the South East. And this was, of course, the London hustings. So potentially an audience more predisposed towards Rishi Sunak than the other parts of the country. They've done 12 of these hustings now. It's all over. But of the 12 regions of the United Kingdom, they've been around them all. Potentially this was one of the more favourable places for Rishi Sunak. But judging by the polls, it's going to be very, very difficult for Rishi Sunak to win this race. People would have to be extraordinarily off in their polling ability. There'd be a lot of egg on a lot of faces if Liz Truss weren't to win this race. However, Liz Truss did set up some big situations for herself, pledges that she will, frankly, be held to in the coming years. She was asked by Nick Ferrari the question, will you commit in the way that George H.W. Bush did to read my lips, no new taxes? And she said that she would commit to that. No new taxes from her as Prime Minister, something that Rishi Sunak did not commit to. Also something that many people think will be very difficult to stick to given the financial squalls that this country is sailing to. I expect that of that hustings there'll be a number of quotes that will be revisited in the coming months and years, keeping the feet of the Prime Minister to the fire. It's interesting to see that Liz Truss has been saying in the last couple of weeks that not only has she campaigned as a Conservative in this leadership election, but she will govern as a Conservative as well. Interestingly, writing in the Conservative Home website last week, she said something that was almost the opposite of what normal Prime Ministers say. Normal Prime Ministers say, look, I might have run this as a Conservative, but I'll govern for the whole country. Liz Truss wrote that I will be the Prime Minister for the whole country, but I will not forget that I'm the leader of the Conservative Party as well. Perhaps the first ideological leader since Margaret Thatcher.
Well, that's actually a really interesting point, that, Tom, swiftly on that. Yes. We're going to return to Liz Truss shortly, Christine, because she said some stuff about motorways. That's right. And we've got a big guest on very, very shortly about this. In case you didn't clock it, basically, Liz Truss is essentially saying we might scrap the old 70-mile-an-hour limit on motorways. I said earlier, I do tragically drive a BMW. I wasn't aware there was a speed limit, so there we go. But, Christina, I'll bring you in now. It's hotting up. We're going to go to a pollster as well shortly. It's all going on here. Who's front-running? Who's going to be potentially our next Prime Minister? It looks like Truss at the minute. Is she the one with more Conservative values for you?
Absolutely. I mean, I wanted Kemi Badenoch, cards on the table. That was ages ago. That now seems like absolutely ancient history. Liz Truss has grown on me throughout this campaign. When she started out, I thought, I can't bear the thought of her as Prime Minister, but she's got more confidence, she's got better and better. What worries me is that she does seem to be promising all sorts of things. She's going to be hit by a 10-ton truck on Tuesday or maybe Wednesday when she finally gets into Downing Street.
Terrible time to become Prime Minister.
Terrible time to becoming Prime Minister. And there was some footage of Boris going on all over the place at the moment, and the difference between Boris when he first arrived at number 10 and Boris now, you can see it all over his face.
Oh, absolutely.
He's aged in those few years.
Oh, it's what I call the Ole Gunnar Solskjaer effect at Manchester United. He came in, nicknamed the babyface assassin, and he left looking like an orc. Anyway, let's look now at whether Liz Truss is still the firm favourite. It is Chris Curtis. It is the head of political polling at Opinion. Chris, thank you very, very much. You've been sitting rather patiently there. What is the latest in the polls when it comes to who our next PM is?
Well, it really hasn't changed much over the course of this contest. What we've seen pretty much from the time that we got our final two candidates was Liz Truss was the overwhelming favourite. If anything, that position has only strengthened as this contest has gone on. I don't like the idea of there being egg on my face if I'm wrong this week, like Tom just said, but unfortunately at this stage there's very little else I can say. She's so strongly ahead, the lead is so comfortable that I think it's very unlikely that Liz Truss won't be going up to Balmoral to kiss the Queen's hand next Tuesday.
Forward, actually, to the potential, anyway, of you being wrong so that we can run a feature of Tom Harwood throwing eggs at your face. But just of moving it on, let's say Liz Truss does become our next Prime Minister. How does she fare against Keir Starmer? Because that's kind of the bigger question in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we really shouldn't underestimate the size of the challenge that Liz Truss will face. Most opinion polls now show her trailing Keir Starmer when it comes to who would make the best Prime Minister. That could change. I think it's fairly likely that we'll see at least some shift on that next week. She will become the Prime Minister. That will give her lots of new opportunities. She will put her vision out. She will set out a speech on Downing Street where she sets out her vision. I think also she's probably going to have to shift her position on the cost of living and start to say a lot more about what she's going to do to combat that. Now, that's going to give her lots of opportunities to try and turn these numbers around. But there's a massive challenge that she faces. The Conservatives are behind the Labour Party right now. They're losing trust on economic competence, which is going to be the biggest question come the next election. And she's now less popular than Keir Starmer. So a lot of work for her to do in her first few weeks in office.
Absolutely. Can we trust Truss is going to be the question of the day. Chris, thank you very much. Chris Curtis there, head of political polling at Opinion. Exciting times ahead, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, we do want to hear from you. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Our top story of the day there, of course. Do you back nuclear? OK, we want to hear from you on that, but I've got loads more coming your way, including the former Stick. That's right. Do you remember Top Gear? Well, we want to ask that question to him. Will Britain be able to handle the speed? That's right. Can we go to scrap the 70-mile-an-hour limit on motorways? We're also going to be discussing the Shamima Begum latest. What's the latest when it comes to the Queen as well? All of that and much, much more coming your way. And the breakdown of the traditional family. I'm wondering whether or not now we have to move to, I don't know, different ways of doing relationships, I suppose. Is it an advert for arranged marriages when you look at the ethnic breakdown on it? And, of course, should we be doing more as well to promote monogamy in relationships? This is GB News on your TV, online and digital radio. Don't you dare move. I'll be back in 2.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Patrick Christie's here on GB News Live. Now, the 70-mile-per-hour speed limit on Britain's motorways could be scrapped if Liz Truss is given the keys to number 10. The Tory leadership candidate said instead that she'd look at scrapping speed limits altogether on the three-lane carriageways and follow a similar model to that of Germany, the only country in the world without a national speed limit. Their deaths on the road have dramatically decreased year on year over the last decade. I suppose the difference there is it's mostly Germans driving those cars, not British boy racers. So, with no speed limit on our motorways, can us Brits handle the need for speed? Ben Collins is a racing driver and, of course, the former Top Gear Stig. He joins me now. Where's your helmet? Should have said that out loud before I actually did it. Anyway, there you go. Right, so can we actually handle the 70-mile-an-hour speed limit being scrapped? Because I'm not sure we can.
Well, I guess that big question is going to be decided by the folk that inhabit the middle lane. The Germans are really good at lane discipline, so I think they're quite used to driving at higher speeds, but more so than us on the Autobahn. I think the first big hurdle for the Brits is, can we get past 40? So many of the motorways now are jammed up with roadworks. You can't get past 40 mile an hour in an average speed zone. But I would welcome the scrapping of those cameras and certainly raising the speed limit to 80. That would just keep up really with the safety standards. So the technology in the cars, the better tyres, more grip that we have, better stopping distances, everything really that's made the modern car a safer environment. The roads haven't kept up with it, so the speed limit should go up.
Fantastic point, actually, which the speed limit could be 1,000 miles per hour, but whenever I go up and down the M1, I barely get over 30 at the moment. So, yes, maybe there's not too much of a point to that. But some people will say, look, this is going to lead to accidents. We've biffed off the hard shoulder, OK, so there's none of that anymore. So if you're travelling now at 100 miles an hour and something kicks off, there's nowhere for you to even go. Is it not hard to justify this increase in the speed limit if indeed you're ever able to hit it?
There's always a debate on safety. The irony is that actually, when you're travelling at higher speeds, you tend to focus more. A lot of these sort of constant, average speed zones, you destroy people's concentration. You just switch off basically, and you end up having pile-ups with other cars. Referencing the smart motorways, I'm glad to see that they're looking into that and reviewing it, because it looks so far that the stats are showing that they're maybe twice as dangerous as the old school motorways, where you had a hard shoulder and something to run into, and a safe space to fix your car if you had a puncture. So that's under review, and I think that they will find out whether smart motorways are really the future or not.
Can you give us some top tips for driving quickly? Because you can bet that the first thing that I'm going to do if this speed limit gets increased is to try to go as fast as I possibly can in my car. And I think a lot of people are thinking that, even though they might not say it out loud. So come on, keep me and indeed anyone who gets in my way safe.
Basically, I mean, at the higher speeds, you just need to allow a safer distance in front of you so that you've got space to stop and look further ahead. That is the most obvious thing you learn when you're travelling at higher speeds, is to look further in front. You've got more time to deal with situations as they arise. And that doesn't need to be a skill you learn on a racetrack. It's common sense. So actually, driving on motorways are by far the safest roads that we drive on a daily basis. So it isn't that difficult to adapt. A 10-mile-an-hour change, I think, would be a pretty simple step, one that's well overdue here. I think unlimited speeds, that might take us a bit more time to get used to it, adjust to that. And that, I would suggest, does require some practice. The way it works in Germany, they have got their motorway sections are much straighter for longer. And I think that we've got more curvature on our road network. So I'm not sure that we want to go exactly the same route as the Germans, but I do hope they maintain their fantastic autobahns.
Yeah, indeed. And also, just very lastly, Ben, we've not got long left. My understanding, anyway, of the driving tests in Germany, and I think in a lot of Scandinavian countries as well, are a lot more rigorous than the ones that we have here. So would it be possible for us to increase speed limits, potentially, dare I say, have no speed limit, but have more rigorous driving tests? So when people are unleashed onto the roads, they're better drivers?
Certainly, the Scandies, I mean, they focus more on adverse weather conditions. We tend to have a meltdown here when it snows, and because we get less snow and ice than they do in the Nordic countries. So it's understandable that they train for those environments. I think there is a shortage of real-world experience. I think that's partly changed recently in the driving test. But traditionally, there was no training on motorways. When I passed my driving test, you didn't have to even go on a motorway to be assessed at that point. But I think as we start to use them more, and let's face it, this is how people are getting to work. It's a reliable way of getting to work. Railways at the moment are a challenge. Yes, more training will certainly keep us safer. And I would advise anyone to always try and further their knowledge and expand their experience.
I suppose one unfortunate consequence of a motorway without any kind of speed limit whatsoever would, unfortunately, like I've said, be the turning of Insulate Britain into red mist. But Ben Collins, thank you very much. Of course, former racing driver and, of course, former Top Gear Stig as well. I've always wondered with that, though. I mean, he could be anyone, couldn't he? Because we never saw the Stig, but we're just going to have to believe him. You are watching and listening to Patrick Christie's right here on GB News. Coming up, the Children's Commissioner says that the governments need to stop being so squeamish about standing up for the family, as she called on the next Prime Minister to do more to support and encourage couples to stay together. Very little point trying to persuade this current Prime Minister that should be the case. Dame Rachel D'Souza claims the data collected showed that stable families had a great protective effect, making children happier and more successful. I'll be getting on to the Marriage Foundation and asking them if it's time for a cultural expectation of lifelong marriage. Also, we're going to touch on arranged marriage as well, because interesting stats coming out there about the percentage, or the ethnic breakdown, I should say, when it comes to marriages lasting. All that coming up, of course, we'll be joined by the wonderful Christine Hamilton. But first, it's the news.
Patrick, thank you. The headlines: police investigating the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt Corbell in Liverpool say 2 guns were used during the shooting. They've released CCTV of the gunman running from the scene near the Knotty Ash area of the city. Olivia was killed when he chased his intended target into her home. Police say they were not known to her family. Boris Johnson has promised £700 million in funding for the Sizewell C nuclear power station in Suffolk. In his final major policy speech as Prime Minister, he said he was confident it'll get it over the line in the next few weeks.
This project will create tens of thousands of jobs, but it will also power 6 million homes. That is roughly a fifth, 6 million homes, roughly a fifth of all the homes in the UK. So it will help to fix the energy needs, not just of this generation, but of the next. Renewables are not only helping us to defeat climate change, they're also helping to keep bills lower. Now, I say go nuclear and go large and go with Sizewell C.
Millions of households could face the biggest squeeze in living standards in over a century. The Resolution Foundation saying the number of people living in absolute poverty is set to rise by 3 million in the next few years. The think tank warns real household disposable income is on course to fall by 10% over this year and next.
Our fight is a workers' fight. Solidarity!
Tens of thousands of rail workers will take part in another round of strikes as part of an ongoing dispute over pay. The RMT union has announced in Dust on the 15th and 17th of September. Yesterday, 2 other unions announced their members will also walk off the job this month. Those are your headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio here on GB News. Now back to Patrick.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrow.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Now, of course, we are the People's Channel and we want to hear from you. And lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on nuclear energy policy plans. So, Ian's been on. How is the promise of a new atomic plant in the next 10 years going to bring down energy prices now? That's interesting, really. Well, I mean, the kind of consensus is that it isn't, although we did have Dr. Benny Pizer on before, who seemed to say that maybe we could get smaller nuclear energy hubs in the short term. But still, I take your point, Ian. I mean, right now, as of tomorrow, it's not. Robert says we should stop this net zero rubbish and start building the economy by extracting all we can from our own resources. Christine Hamilton is with me throughout the show. And just quickly, you agree on that, Christine, don't you?
Absolutely. We should start fracking. We should, the North Sea, etc., the coal under Yorkshire, use it at the Drax power station. Of course we should. Politicians are too short-term normally, and Boris has now done a great big long-term thing, but we've got to do something to fill the gap.
Absolutely. Helen's been on. Thank you very much, Helen. I'm sure that the experts don't want to sit in the dark either. We need to get on with energy security. Go nuclear. Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, was in. If you are just joining us and you've not really bothered to check the news at all yet today, Boris Johnson is announcing a new nuclear plant, of course, and that is going to cost around 700 million, big ones. It might take somewhere between 6 and 10 years to build. Cue the natural uproar from people who don't like nuclear because they've watched documentaries about Chernobyl, but actually we could well sit in the dark. But Tom Harwood, of course, was saying that actually, if you go back not so long ago, they were saying, well, we can't do it because it won't be up and running until 2021. Well, it would be up and running now then, wouldn't it? Should we have gone nuclear sooner? Bov says critics will go nuclear when their Wi-Fi crashes and they have no free heating, air conditioning and 3 meals a day. They should back anything to shore up our energy security. I can't help but agree with you there, Bov, which is an interesting name, which is that actually I think when people start to feel the pinch, they're going to change their minds. Another Ian, have we double Ian'd? We've double Ian'd in your comments section today, gbviews at gbnews.uk. We definitely need nuclear power, says Ian. Why don't we have the small modular reactors that Rolls-Royce are selling to Japan and elsewhere? They're much quicker than the large stations. Nuclear is by far the most reliable, renewable energy source. So the second Ian there, building on the first Ian's points. You love to see it. Now, moving on from that, the Children's Commissioner, important story this, the Children's Commissioner is calling on the next Prime Minister to stop ducking the need for stable families. So Dame Rachel D'Souza says that the new data suggests a stable family unit has a protective effect, making children happier and more successful. Basically, the best thing for kids is to have a stable home, OK? So her independent family review, published just this morning, found that 23% of children now live in a lone parent household, and that's almost twice the European average of 13%. But these figures keep on coming because while 44% of children do not spend their entire childhood living with both their biological parents, that's a huge number of kids, 44%. It concludes that children in stable families do better in their GCSEs, and children who get on well with both their parents will earn more by the time they reach the age of 25. So I'm asking, should we have a cultural expectation of lifelong marriage? Should we actually stop moving away from quotes unquote the modern family, which in many cases is not a family at all, and start prioritising lifelong monogamy? Well, Harry Benson is the research director at the Marriage Foundation. Harry, thank you very, very much. There seems to be a push these days for, well, I think it can be summed up in one emoji, can't it? The pregnant man emoji. Whereas actually maybe the stable family unit is the best thing for kids. And of course, as we all know, children are the future.
I think the irony of this whole topic, and I'm really pleased that the Children's Commissioner has brought it up, the irony is that almost all cabinet members, and this has been true for a long time, get married. They think it's important in their own private lives, overwhelmingly so. And yet in our public policy, we discriminate heavily against married couples. The government will give you the impression that they will bribe you by, say, up to £250 in a transferable tax allowance. But you can stand in the low-income groups, you stand to lose thousands of pounds in benefits or tax credits or universal credit by living together, let alone marrying. So I think it's actually a miracle that anybody on low income gets married at all. But it has produced this huge marriage gap. The rich are still marrying in their droves. And as you go down the income spectrum, you find fewer and fewer people at the lower end are getting married at all. And I think the state plays a big role in this, and politicians need to wise up to this. So I welcome Dame Rachel's report on this subject.
Yeah, but it's a tricky one, though, isn't it? Because, of course, you know, there used to be a push for, or not necessarily a push, just more societal norms for people to get married at the age of 18, 19, 20. But now we've got people living a lot longer. There's a lot more on offer. Tinder didn't exist when my grandma got married. And actually, do you want to kind of maybe force people to stick around in an unhappy marriage?
Well, let's just deal with the unhappy marriage. The idea that if you're on an unhappy marriage, then you're going to be trapped in that forever. We did a study a few years ago with my colleague, Professor Steve McKay at the University of Lincoln, where we looked at unhappy parents, and it's mercifully only a very small percentage. And about a third of those split up over the next 10 years, but the remaining 2/3 overwhelmingly become happy. So the point of it is that happiness is a transient thing, and unhappiness particularly is a transient thing. Very few people, unfortunate as they are, get trapped forever in these unhappy marriages. But the fact is that, you know, once you take into account factors like age, income, education, ethnicity, religion, and whether pregnancies are planned, you still find that people who are married are much more likely to stay together than those who don't.
I've got some stats here that I think our viewers, our listeners as well will find interesting. I'd love your reaction to. There are differences when it comes to ethnicity as well. So 57% of Black Caribbean, I'm just reading this now, 57% of Black Caribbean and 44% of Black African families were lone parents. This is according to this latest data. That's compared to 22% for white British families. An astonishing stat here for me, 11% of Indian families, so just 11%, were headed by lone parents. A staggering 87% fell into the married or civil partnership category. Now, I'm not generalising here at all. I am just making a point of interest, really, which is I think that arranged marriages are more common in certain cultures than in others, and specifically when it comes to, you could say, Asian and Indian cultures as well. That's just a thing. That's an accepted fact. Is that an advert for arranged marriage?
I think you make a really interesting point. I don't actually know of any studies that look specifically at arranged versus romantic-based marriages. I haven't seen any on that basis. What I can tell you is that we looked again. Steve McCain, my professor at University of Lincoln, and I looked at the influence of ethnicity on family stability. And once you take into account, again, age, education, income, all that sort of stuff, and even marriage and even happiness, we found that Indian and Pakistani and Bangladeshi mothers were more likely to stay together than any other group, and black fathers were least likely to stay together than any other group. And the two big factors which seemed to make a difference were that marriage is much more common amongst Islamic groups and less common amongst black and white groups, although the black groups do even worse than the white groups in terms of stability. So there's something about marriage. But even after that, there's still there's some cultural difference. And you might be right. It might be that arranged marriage plays a part. There's some very interesting research on where you marry people of different religious faiths. Your breakup rates and your happiness are likely to be less. So the more things that we have that are different between us, it's certainly in fact these foundational values of what socioeconomic group we belong to, what religious group we belong to, what ethnic group we belong to. If we come from different backgrounds, it's a lot more difficult to manage a relationship. You've got a lot more things you can argue over. And you can, by removing some of those factors from the equation, then with arranged marriages, then you might be absolutely right. That might be a major factor. I don't know, but I suspect you're probably right.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it. One of my exes is a vegan Remainer, and we can guess how that ended. Harry, thank you very much. Harry Benson, Research Director at the Marriage Foundation. Tempted to pry into his own married life, but I thought let's just go against that just in case there's some nasty stuff there. Christine, bring you in.
The sanctity of marriage. The thought of you being married to a vegan Remainer is just bliss. Ex-married to a vegan.
Yes.
You can't generalise, of course you can't, but basically all the statistics, all the studies show that marriage is the bedrock of society, and children brought up within a stable married relationship, they have better outcomes, whatever it is, whether it's happiness, exams, etc., etc., etc. We used to give tax relief for married couples, and I remember people used to time their weddings so that they got the maximum tax relief. I can't remember which.
Nothing screams romance.
But what I think,
timing your wedding
absolutely,
to get a tax break.
But every single government policy now, like they do for other things, how is this going to impact on the family? And for too long, people have been terrified to criticise single-parent families because it's not woke. And a lot of single-parent families, and 90% of them are women, headed by women.
Yes, they are, yeah.
It's not woke, and you're criticising people for not doing it properly, which is actually not what it is. But people are frightened to criticise, but it is undoubtedly the case that marriage and family group is the best way to bring up children. And family is the bedrock of society. It's the building block of society, so we ought to encourage it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tax breaks for marriage.
Well, exactly, because now it actually, the opposite is true. It now almost pays to not be married, to have kids and not be married, actually.
No one's saying that people should stay together if they're unhappy. Of course they shouldn't. But if you're married, you're more likely to try and work through your difficulties, which, let's be honest, I'm not married to a vegan Remainer, but we all have difficulties.
We all have difficulties, that's right. I can't help but feel I'm of an age now where lots of my friends are getting married, and I can't help but feel a lot of them just want an expensive day out that they're demanding me to come to, usually as well a foreign stag do.
The more expensive the wedding, the shorter the marriage, usually. Don't fall into that trap of spending a fortune on your wedding. It doesn't matter.
Well, there we go. I tell you what, you should be a relationship counsellor. Anyway, in a break with tradition, the Queen is to appoint the next Prime Minister at Balmoral in Scotland, instead, of course, at the usual place at Buckingham Palace, or indeed at Windsor Castle. Well, Her Majesty will meet either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak on the 6th of September. The 96-year-old monarch, who's been suffering with mobility problems, has been advised to remain at her Balmoral residence in Aberdeenshire, where she is currently on holiday. I'm joined now by Charles Ray, The Sun's former royal correspondent. Thank you very much. I believe there is a precedent for this set by, I want to say, Edward VII, who made someone go to France, I think, a little while ago. But it's not exactly a long-established precedent, is it, Charles? Is this some point of concern for us that the Queen is staying put, do we think, or should our new PM make the effort to go and see her?
Oh, I think the new PM should make the effort, and the old PM should make the effort to go and see her. I mean, she's 96 years old. She's got mobility problems, and there's no suggestion that the mobility problems are getting worse. What she has decided with her aides, is that it's better that she stays where she is rather than take the risk that she may not be able to travel down to Buckingham Palace to install the new Prime Minister, her 15th Prime Minister, and take the official resignation of her old Prime Minister. So it's quite right that Boris Johnson goes up there, and either Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss goes up there and is asked or invited to form a new government.
Can you explain to me the protocol of what actually happens then? So so Boris Johnson will rock up first, will he? And he'll say, I'm out of a job, Mum. Can you maybe install the next chap or lady who's coming in next? And what actually happens?
What will happen is that on Monday we know that there's going to be the announcement as to who's going to be the new leader of the party, and then on Tuesday morning Boris Johnson should make a very brief statement outside number 10 Downing Street, and then he will fly up to Scotland, and he will then offer his official resignation to the Queen. She will thank him very much for her service, and he will then go, after a short time, he'll go out one door, and then in through another door will come either Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss, who will then shake hands with the Queen, and she will invite either Liz or Rishi to form the new government. There will be a sort of ceremonial kissing of hands, which doesn't actually happen anymore. It's more of a handshake. And then there'll be a chat. She may put up a couple of suggestions or ideas or discussions, as she's entitled to do as head of state, and there'll be tea and biscuits, I would imagine.
Tea and biscuits and a gabble of corgis as well. Charlie, thank you very much. Charles Ray there, the Sun's former royal correspondent. I know Christine Hamilton's itching to get involved here. We're going to have to return to Christine. We're going to have to return to you at a later date because I need to squeeze this in before the end. The traditional UK car manufacturer, I know you'll have views on this too, Jaguar, certainly do. Unless you're American, in which case it's Jaguar, is poised to be scrapped as the brand of choice for the Prime Minister's personal car. They're going to replace it, but not with an Aston Martin, not with a Bentley, not with a Roller. No, OK? Not with any of the great British brands. Instead, it's going to be Audi, a German car company. Ministers are reportedly outraged about the message that it portrays to British manufacturers. Is it unpatriotic? Joining me now is the one and only, is Charlie Mullins, the founder of Pimlico Plumbers. Charlie, is it deeply unpatriotic to have our new Prime Minister driving around in a German whip?
Undoubtedly, I think it's very embarrassing for the government. They've taken us out of the EU, and now they're trading with them. Very embarrassing, totally unnecessary. Surely if they can't get Jaguar, they could get Rover or another English make, or maybe keep what they've got for another year. But this is sending out the wrong message to many manufacturers, and very disheartening, I think, that people are just going to, they're going to give up on things like that. If their own government can't, back Britain, then who can? And today, I think number 10 said that they promote British goods as much as they can, and yet they're changing their fleet of cars. It's just crazy.
Yeah, look, I happen to agree with you, right? I do think that it's an absolute disgrace that we've got a British Prime Minister who's not going to be driving around in a British car. All I will say, Charlie, though, is, are you trying to have it a bit both ways here? Because you said that we'd struggle to trade with our European friends post-Brexit. Our Prime Minister struck up a personal trade deal with the Audi.
Well, yes, but come on, what I'm trying to say is we had, plenty of trade going on. He took us all away from it. They're going to go back to it. It's just sending out the wrong message. And, we've got a new Prime Minister going in and going to be being chauffeured around in an Audi or a Mercedes or something. It's totally wrong message. And surely they can just keep what they've got for another year. I know they've got to be bulletproof. I know they've got to be not too old, but surely we can just adapt what we've got. But, so disheartening. And to think a new Prime Minister is actually going to be promoting German car, it's just not right.
I agree with you, although what I struggle with, right, is the idea that you think backing British and patriotism involves driving around in a Jaguar, for example, but when it comes to us having control of our laws and potentially our borders as well, you were happy to have us led by an unelected EU bigwig and have foreign judges deciding our laws. Where's the patriotism there, Charlie?
No, I'm not happy at all. I wanted to be a Remainer, and still it's a Remainer. And hopefully some stage we'll reverse it. So, I'm not backing what's going on at all. And I think that, with the new lady coming in, she's not for Brexit either, is she?
Okay, okay, all right, Charlie, thank you very, very much. Great to have you on. I could talk to you all day, actually, my good man, but unfortunately we're going to have to get cracking. Charlie, good stuff. Charlie Mullins there, of course, the founder of Pimlico Plumbers. What do you make of that? Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Is it a little bit hypocritical to say that just driving around a car is patriotic, but actually wanting to remain in the EU is also patriotic? I find that a little bit bizarre. Christine Watts, very quickly.
Very quickly. The car that our head of state, not head of state, that our Prime Minister drives around with is a massive status symbol, and it's not the fact that it's a German car. If it was a French car, it would be just as bad. Yes. It's got to be a British car, and I think it's absolutely horrifying that it's not going to.
Well, if it was a French car, it probably wouldn't start. You're with me, Patrick Christie's online, on TV and on DAB radio. Lots more coming up in the next hour. We've hardly had a chance to come up for air there, but we'll be whizzing you through the news again. We're back in just a tick. Stay tuned.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's Patrick Christie's here with you on GB News, on your TV, online and digital radio. Coming up between now and 6 o'clock, figures show that there's been an 80% increase in the number of children crossing the channel in the UK. Massive story this, as far as I'm concerned, because more than 1,000 of them have reached the UK in the first 6 months of 2022 alone. A figure that was not reached actually until September last year. Lots to get stuck into on this particular story, OK, because some people are saying this changes the game. If people arrive here, even if they're economic migrants, not asylum seekers or refugees, but they have got a child in tow, does that make you more sympathetic to them staying? Some people would say that maybe children are shamelessly being used to get residency. What do you think about that? How do we keep kids safe as well from people trafficking gangs? Also, this hour, a promise of £700 million for a new nuclear power station in the very heart of the UK. It's caused uproar on both sides of this debate, not least about an hour ago. Boris Johnson made the announcement of the Sizewell Sea in Suffolk just days before he hands the keys over to the new Prime Minister. Now, he claimed that he was absolutely confident it will get over the line in the next few weeks. Do you back nuclear? Do you think that actually we need to do whatever we can as quickly as we possibly can in order to solve our cost of living and our energy crisis? Do you think alternatives are better and safer? Would you live next to a nuclear reactor? And of course, Canada says it will follow up these claims that one of its spies smuggled Shamima Begum into Syria in 2015. Now, of course, we all know Shamima, don't we? The ISIS bride. She fled the UK, fled from what? Tower Hamlets, to be joined in the Islamic State group with two of her friends. Her lawyers are now calling on her UK citizenship to be reinstated. claims that she was the victim of trafficking. Now, there's lots to get stuck into here. We are going to be having a head-to-head debate on that. That's going to be spicy, so you're not going to want to miss it. The key question for me centres around, obviously, whether or not we should be reinstating her citizenship. How do you feel about that? I've asked if you live next door to a nuclear reactor. Would you live next door to Shamima Begum? Is it safe to have her back? But also, crucially, was she old enough to make the decision for herself? She was 15 when she went away. I made a lot of mistakes as a 15-year-old. I never joined a jihadi death cult. Joining me for the next 2 hours is author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton, who's got lots to say, but sadly not enough time to say it at the minute. But first, it's your latest news headlines. Don't go anywhere.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon to you. Our top story on GB News today, police investigating the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt Corbell in Liverpool say 2 guns were used in the shooting which killed her. CCTV has been released of the gunman running from the scene near the Knotty Ash area of the city. Olivia was killed when he chased his intended target right into her home. Police say they were not known to her family. 2 men were arrested on suspicion of murder last week, but they've been released on bail. Boris Johnson has promised £700 million in funding for the Sizewell C nuclear power station in Suffolk. In his final major policy speech as Prime Minister, he said he was confident it would get over the line in the next few weeks. He believes it would be madness not to go ahead with the new power plant.
This project will create tens of thousands of jobs, but it will also power 6 million homes. That is roughly a fifth, 6 million homes, roughly a fifth of all the homes in the UK. So it will help to fix the energy needs, not just of this generation, but of the next. Renewables are not only helping us to defeat climate change, they're also helping to keep bills lower. Now, I say go nuclear and go large and go with Sizewell C.
Now, millions of households could face the biggest squeeze in living standards in over a century. The Resolution Foundation says the number of people living in absolute poverty is set to rise by 3 million over the next few years. The think tank adds the real household disposable income is on course to fall by 10% over this year. And the government says it's preparing to provide extra support once the new Prime Minister is in place. Conservative MP Mark Harper says Rishi Sunak plans to tackle inflation if he gets the top job.
Gripping inflation and not doing anything that risks making inflation worse. And his concern is that large unfunded tax cuts promised by his opponent in this contest would actually make inflation worse. That's not going to help families. So his focus is get inflation down, inflation that's being driven by global events, but get that down, stop it becoming embedded in the economy. That's how you help those 14 million families have a better quality of life.
Well, the Shadow Secretary for Business and Industry, Jonathan Reynolds, says businesses should be given relief to prevent knock-on costs to customers.
So the starting point should be cutting business rates. We would increase the threshold for small business rates, relief to £25,000. So you're immediately getting help and hope to people that there will be some relief on the bills they've got to pay. Say, the fertiliser plants in this country, they're not running. They can't afford to run. So you're putting into next year the inflation, the cost of food going up even further because they can't operate because fertiliser will therefore be more expensive.
Well, Liz Truss has hinted at further cost of living support this winter should she become Prime Minister. Writing in The Sun, the Foreign Secretary claims if she becomes leader, there'll be no new taxes or energy rationing. Mr Sunak and Ms Truss took part in their final leadership hustings in front of Conservative members in London last night. The vote closes at 5 p.m. tomorrow. Now, 2 men will be charged in connection with a deadly incident at a disco in Northern Ireland. 17-year-old Lauren Bullock, Connor Curry, who was 16, and 17-year-old Morgan Barnard were crushed as hundreds of people queued outside the Greenvale Hotel 3 years ago. Prosecutors say the men aged 43 and 55 will be charged with gross negligence manslaughter. Tens of thousands of rail workers will take part in another round of strikes as part of an ongoing dispute over pay. The RMT union announced industrial action will be staged on the 15th and 17th of September. Yesterday, 2 other unions announced their members will also walk off the job this month. And finally, tributes are being paid to the veteran broadcaster Bill Turnbull, who's died at the age of 66. The former BBC Breakfast presenter was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2017. His family says he died at home in Suffolk following a challenging and committed fight against the disease. Former BBC co-host Susanna Reid described him as the kindest, funniest and most generous man in the business. That's your news update. I'm back in half an hour with all the latest news headlines. Now let's get back to Patrick.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. We're going to get stuck straight in, easy for me to say, to a top topic for you today, and a topic that's been brewing for a very long time. New figures show there's been an 80% increase in the number of child migrants crossing the Channel. There's also reports that smugglers are offering a 3-for-2 deal for families attempting to make the crossing, with some allowing kids to go for free. Charities believe that it could be linked to a belief that families are less likely than young single men to be sent to Rwanda for their asylum claim to be processed. Massive stuff, this huge increase in the number of quotes-unquote children coming across the Channel. This opens up a load of different questions. Here to answer at least some of them is international security and border control expert Henry Bolton, OBE. Henry, thank you very much. So an 80% increase in the number of children coming across the Channel. Does this mean that now there are tactics being used by human traffickers, dare I say it, the people coming across the Channel, to essentially shamelessly use children in order to try to better their chances of staying in the UK?
Patrick, good evening, first off, but the simple answer is yes. Look, the Albanian organised crime really has absolutely no bounds. They have for years been involved, for example, in trafficking of human organs, body parts, from children. I mean, it is something that has been going on for 20, 25 years. So using children in an unscrupulous way in order to drum up business is absolutely, they've got no compunction about doing that whatsoever. And of course, you know, if you look at this whole business as sort of the civilian or the sort of the legal version of all of this is really like a travel agent and with tourists. You know, in this particular case, what you've got operators, the people smugglers, who are moving people, just like a tour operator. And just like a tour operator, they're going to try and drum up business in every way they can. But slightly unlike a tour operator, they are going to be lying and deceiving their sort of clients, if you like, as well as actually moving members of their own crime groups across.
Yeah, well, Henry, I suppose this question posed next is whether or not they are lying and deceiving, because is it actually true that if I turned up on a beach in Kent or Dover or wherever with a child that I was claiming was my own, I would be more likely to stay in the UK?
Again, the answer, Patrick, is yes. And the reason for that is because there is a whole lot of stuff about families and keeping families together. And so if you can prove some familial link, that's fine. But how do you prove that? And my concern here would be that this marketing ploy on the part of the people smugglers will also result, I have no doubt, having dealt with Albanian organised crime before in Albania and in the region, I have absolutely no doubt that this will lead to people effectively abducting children and bringing children along, making out they're members of the family where they are not. So there's all sorts of things tied up in this. But again, these people smugglers do not care. As far as I'm concerned, they're as bad as a terrorist.
So just to clarify on that, Henry, you are now concerned that as a result of things like 3-for-2 offers from people smugglers, kids go free offers from people smugglers, that we're going to see a spike in child abduction and child trafficking across the continent, and these poor children being brought into Britain, and that would be because our asylum system is too soft?
It's also because our asylum system is, quite frankly, naive. And we've been dealing with Albanian organised crime in this country ever since Tony Blair opened the door to the Kosovar organised crime groups in about 2000 after the war in Kosovo. Albania has been infiltrating particularly British and Swedish sort of criminal markets, if you like, ever since then, particularly in the narcotics and the vice trade. And they will, and they do in the region. They sell children. They sell children's body parts and sort of and organs. And I have no doubt that as the UK asylum and immigration system is seen to favour groups or families with children, then we're going to see children exploited as a method of keeping people here, even if they're not family members, but they are made out to be. And the Albanians are past masters at the false documentation as well. So we're creating a number of really difficult situations for ourselves with our immigration and asylum rules as they are, and that they would not be difficult to sort out. The problem is the Home Office, the Immigration Service, and the government writ large simply don't have the experience, the knowledge of the Albanians, the Albanian organised crime, or how organised crime operates in terms of people smuggling. It sounds shocking, but that's the reality, partly as a result of mobility, as they call it, the rapid turnover and movement of civil servants within government departments, including the Home Office.
Henry, thank you very much. Informative stuff. Henry Bolton at OBE. If you're just joining us, that is, of course, the story. There's been an 80% increase of children coming across the channel. Now, people smugglers, of course, doing deals. Kids go free to basically get into the UK, essentially, all too easily. But just to get to the very root of this, Christine Hamilton, I'm going to bring you in now. Thank you, Henry. Christine Hamilton, I'm going to bring you in now. Joining me throughout the show, of course, is Christine. You audibly gasped when Henry Bolton there mentioned the name Tony Blair.
Well, wouldn't you?
Did Blair actually start this then? Is it like a lot of negatives in this country, do all roads lead back to Blair?
Well, he encouraged immigration because he knew perfectly well that, on balance, the immigrants would vote Labour rather than Tory. And it worked. Absolutely, all roads lead back to Tony Blair on that sort of thing. You mentioned, I think, in your introduction that if you have a child with you, you're less likely to be sent to Rwanda. I don't think anybody's going to
no one's going to Rwanda anyway.
Nobody's going anywhere. But those figures are not... it cannot be coincidental. Suddenly, an 80% increase in children arriving. Of course, it is ludicrous. We're spending 5 million a day housing these people. We're going to house all the children. You have to be more careful where you've got children involved. It's not their fault. We've got people going to be in our own people going to be in dire poverty. The government doesn't seem to me to have the will to want to stop this. This is the trouble.
Well, this is the thing. Just quickly before we go on, we're going to go to a child psychologist, Emma Kenny, on this, or a psychologist, I should say, really, about the children, because I do want to understand what happens to these kids when they actually come here. But can I just ask you a quick question? Which is, if somebody comes over here and is openly proving that they've been lying about being a refugee and lying about being an asylum seeker, they are a straightforward, economic, some would say illegal migrant, but they have brought a kid over here, does that make you more inclined to let them stay? Because of the kid involved?
Well, you have to. You can't just take the father or the mother away and have a kid left all on its own. You have to consider the child. Of course you have to consider the child, and they know that.
This is why they do it.
The biggest single group of prisoners in this country, nationality-wise, are Albanians.
1 in 10 of our foreign criminals are latest
Albanians.
figures show, are Albanians. Right, Christine, we'll come back to you. Now, the number of children, of course, arriving in the UK is increasing. Who should be responsible for caring for them? Should they be separated from their parents if their parents have arrived here illegally? I understand that. I think the vast majority of us, anyway, want to cut down, of course, on illegal immigration. Some would say general immigration as well. But when kids are involved, the situation gets a lot more complicated. It does beg the question of just what will Britain do with them? And joining me now is psychologist Emma Kenny, who's worked with young people for 15 years. Thank you very much, Emma. Emma, these people, these children, some would say being used by human trafficking gangs for money. Some would say maybe being used in some cases by parents or whoever's got them in order to get residency. Of course, some of them will be fleeing war as well, so there is that. What kind of trauma is it going to cause a child going through mainland Europe in the back of lorries or whatever, getting on a dinghy, arriving at a cold beach in Kent somewhere? I mean, talk me through what kind of state these kids are going to be in.
I mean, I think displacement, full stop, for children is going to be difficult anyway, and a change in culture is, before you even add all of the traumatic things that you're talking about, such as not being with a family member, being forced to act in a way that isn't in conducive experience with your own family, such as being removed from your family, as was just noted when it was horrific listening to that last individual that you interviewed talking about how children are used in this way. I think the crossing itself is hideously traumatic. And then, of course, the rules and rigmaroles that occur if you're successful in arriving, that is incredibly foreign to you as a child. I think we have to be very distinct. It's very different for a child who's coming with parents. Yes, that's highly traumatizing still, because essentially they've got the crossing. They'll be working with strangers in that situation. They'll arrive in a foreign country and continent and have to deal with all of the rules and regulations associated with that. But to some degree, even though there'll be trauma involved with that, because they have a parent or parents available to them, that will be to some degree cushioned a little. When you're talking about children who may be being trafficked or children who are being placed with families that don't relate to them, that post-trauma in that is something so substantial that is likely to cause them problems for the rest of their lives, because essentially a breach of trust has taken place to such a huge degree that the world is no longer a safe place, nor will it ever be. I think that some of the children that come from war-torn environments, there is an understanding within their psyche and a resilience with their psyche where they know that there is a reasoning behind why they're going to arrive, which is for a better life. But arguably, we're looking at very different categories there. And certainly the vast majority of children will struggle.
I remain deeply sceptical as well when it comes to whether or not some of these children arriving are actually arriving with their parents or people they've never met before. The reason I remain deeply sceptical about that is because I think we all remember some of those cases where schools up and down the country had a 40-year-old man sitting in the back of their GCSE maths class, and we weren't allowed to do dental age checks on them because it offended their human rights. So I would be sceptical as to whether or not we're allowed to DNA test people if we're applying the same logic, right? So we'll have to wait and see on that. But just on the child psychology element of it, there's loads of things about this. We've got a housing crisis. We're struggling to build enough houses at the minute. The NHS is under massive stress. If these children are coming over here and they have had psychological trauma, we already have a massive backlog when it comes to child mental health services. We're not going to be able to look after them, are we?
Well, we can't look after our own children. I mean, the government abandoned safeguarding per se when they decided to lock children up in homes with their perpetrators and abusers. That's why child mortality has gone up, along with all the other reasons behind why child mortality has gone up. So we abandoned the idea of keeping children safe from harm, abuse and neglect over 2 years ago. The reality of us being able to deal with a system that's already fundamentally flawed and broken and doesn't offer services to children unless they're in an incredibly acute phase of mental illness or distress, that is problematic in the UK, full stop. What I would say, though, is that children are always children. And if you're a child who has been brought here against your will, or a child who's been brought here by your parents and you're in distress, you're a child. And every human being, every adult who feels that they have any conscience should believe that we should meet the needs of all of those children, both here as in UK residents and those who arrive here as individuals who are non-UK residents seeking support. So we need to do a lot more. But do I feel positive about that potential? Not really.
OK, Emma, thank you very, very much. Emma Kenny there, of course, psychologist, discussing the fact, as people watching on TV can see at the bottom of my screen now, there's been an 80% increase in child migrants crossing the Channel. Christine Hamilton joins me. What do you make of that?
Well, we were talking earlier about the value of marriage and the importance of family as the building block of society, and that it's better for children to be brought up in a secure situation. Imagine the trauma that Emma's just described of it, arriving like that, whether you're with your birth mother and father or not, arriving like that, then you're living in a hotel for a while, you'll be passed from pillar to post. What an appalling start in life, and what are your chances of making the best of that? Not much.
It is shocking. I can't help but feel as well, though, it's another reason to get to grips with what's going on in the Channel. If you're not willing to do it for the sake of the economy, if you're not willing to do it for the sake of our public services, if you're not willing to do it for the sake of potential national security, maybe people will be willing to do it for the safety of young children.
Over to Liz Truss, and let's hope we have a Home Secretary put in place who's going to do something about it.
Absolutely, yes. Maybe come up with a better idea than a wave machine, but there we go. Lots of you have been getting in touch on this very issue, as I knew you would. 80% increase in the number of children crossing the English Channel. Julia's been on. Thank you very much, Julia. If people are arriving with children to make it more likely they won't be challenged, why not DNA test them to make sure these children are actually related and not being trafficked? Cracking point, Julia. I made it earlier. We couldn't even dental record check people for their ages before, which is why we ended up with fully grown men joining schools, you know, sitting in GCSE classes with a full beard and this, that and the other, potentially even going to swimming lessons at schools with young kids. The mind boggles. Paddy's been on. Solid name, Paddy. If I lived in northern France, especially Calais, I'd be very worried about this. How easy would it be for traffickers to just grab any child off a French street and throw them in a boat? Completely spot on. The safety of children here is compromised no matter which way you look at it, OK? This is not safe for kids. Janet says all illegal migrants should be sent back, including children. Now, this is a really interesting point, this, Janet. I'd like to unpick this a bit with you because this is all getting out of hand. They traumatise the children by bringing them over. They shouldn't bring them. Now, Janet, this is the uncomfortable point, isn't it? OK? It's one thing bringing in or taking or forcing out, I should say, expelling illegal immigrants who are adults. It's another thing if a child arrives here illegally, brought here, not on their own, but by adults. We are going to talk a little bit later on in a very different context about whether or not Shamima Begum was old enough to know what she was doing when she went to go and travel to join ISIS in Syria. This is different, massively different, because you've got 4- and 5-year-olds here, babies in some cases, being brought in a dinghy across by their parents. Do you expel the child as well on top of that? Janet, I'm glad you raised that point because it's not going away anytime soon. And it's a very, very tricky topic. And it's going to divide a lot of people. Thank you. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Great points there. Thank you, everyone who's been getting in touch. Coming up, though, Boris Johnson has today promised £700 million worth of funding for the Sizewell C nuclear power project in Suffolk. It's part of a drive to improve the UK's energy security after rocketing gas prices as a result of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. That's the big story today. But how does nuclear power actually work, OK? And is it really the answer? We're going to give you a fact file on that. We are going to be getting stuck into the Shamima Begum debate as well. Loads more coming your way right here on GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'll be back in a tick. Stay tuned.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Oh, yes. Hello, everybody. Now, Boris Johnson has given the go-ahead for the new Sizewell C nuclear reactor in Suffolk, with 700 million quid's worth of government funding pledged towards this project. So it's part of a plan to boost the UK's energy security amid soaring bills and a spike in gas prices following Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Of course, as well, some people would say generations of a lack of planning. It's one of Boris's final acts as Prime Minister, as either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak will be announced as his successor on Monday. But joining me now to discuss the good, the bad and the ugly side of nuclear power is Paul Norman. He's a professor of nuclear physics and nuclear energy at the University of Birmingham. I think it's a really important discussion, this, OK? We have been trying to unpack the rights and wrongs of nuclear power. Let's just try... Now, dumb this down for me, OK? Let's go back to basics. How does nuclear power actually work?
So it is the sort of, term that you'll have heard before about splitting the atom. And the way that this is particularly useful is that the center of the atom is bound very, very strongly. So if you can break it apart, the actual scale of the energy release is massively greater than you get from chemical reactions, such as burning fossil fuels like coal and gas. So there's a huge amount of energy there that we can unlock with the right process. And we just need the right types of materials, like uranium or plutonium, in order to act as our fuel.
OK, right. Now, there's no doubting the fact that we need to come up with a solution to our energy crisis. We need to come up with a solution, in turn, as well, to our cost of living crisis. In your expert opinion, is nuclear the way to go?
I think we certainly need to be progressing with nuclear. That is, I think, to some extent without doubt. That's not to say it needs to be at the exclusion of other sources. So, yes, we still need to be moving forward with renewables. We may need to keep a little bit of gas, using some of that for a period into the future as well. So I think it has to be part of a broader mix. But I certainly think that nuclear has to be part of the solution. And, there are different possible ways of doing that. We can do that with big nuclear, such as Sizewell C and Hinkley Point C. There are smaller reactors as well, small modular reactors and so-called advanced modular reactors that might also be choices in the coming years. Those might also be a good part of the coming solution.
Right, OK. I'm not hearing any wind farms. I'm not hearing any solar energy. I'm not hearing any giant wave machines or anything like this. Are you very much in the kind of nuke, frack, coal group?
No, I think I would include the wind, solar and tidal as part of the renewable solution. So I think, there are various challenges with energy. Of course, one of them is the price at the moment. That is largely dominated by our reliance on gas in recent times. But there are also issues such as security of supply. That's a key factor. And also, of course, the climate change. And that is where I think, it needs to be sort of nuclear combined with renewable sources as well. All of those are low carbon, so we're not sort of harming the environment. There's also a certain sort of security of supply provided by nuclear and renewables as well. So it ticks those sorts of boxes. And I think, there's also on the price, you can debate the prices of different sources, but there's certainly a stability associated with these sources. You know what the prices are going to be because, of course, renewables are coming from the natural forces, the wind and the sun and the tides and so on. And with nuclear, only a small amount of the pricing is associated with the fuel. So if the cost of the uranium changes drastically, that only makes a small impact on the overall economics of nuclear. A lot of the costs are building the power station in the first place and paying for the workers, the workforce and so on. Whereas, of course, unfortunately, with fossil fuels, a lot of that sort of cost and investment is associated with the fuel itself. So once the price of, as we're seeing at the moment, the price of gas changes, the price of coal changes, that immediately impacts us as the consumer very directly.
OK, all right. Now, the figures that I heard earlier in the day was that this particular potential £700 million Sizewell C nuclear reactor could basically heat Britain, I believe it was, for half a day a week, which is a massive contribution. So that's good, OK, we need that. But a lot of people are concerned. They look at things like what's happened in Fukushima. They look at things like what's happened in Chernobyl. Now, I know these are extreme, for want of a better phrase, reactions to this. But actually, people don't want to end up in the fields nearby eating radioactive sheep or having any kind of nuclear fallout. How safe is it? Is it safer than fracking? Is that even a risk?
It is very safe. I mean, the incidents that you mentioned there, as you say, are sort of extreme scenarios. The Chernobyl incident in Ukraine was really down to an unstable design of reactor. So it was sort of poor reactor design that ultimately led to the incident happening. That is, remains to this date the only nuclear accident with sort of significant radiation-induced effects on human health on a sizable number of local populace. With Fukushima, of course, you have essentially a natural disaster, the earthquake and tsunami. But there things were sort of, largely contained. The Japanese, on the whole, did mostly the right sorts of things. They kind of evacuated people, set up exclusion zones and so forth. And the sort of contrast there is that because the reactors were shut down, there wasn't any power to disperse the radioactive material very far at all. Okay. In contrast to Chernobyl, where actually the instability of the reactor causes an explosion that then sweeps things a little bit further. But, these are complete extremes. They are not things that, you can never say anything is completely and utterly zero probability, but it is almost vanishingly small.
And you would know, I'm going to bring Christine in a second, but I could not possibly let you go, Paul, without commenting on your background. If you're listening on radio, Paul is currently sat in front of a blackboard with Einstein-level sums on it. Did you do that deliberately just for effect?
I thought you might ask me that, Patrick. I did. But no, it's not, actually. This is legitimate stuff from a revision lecture for my MSc students that I teach nuclear to at Birmingham. This is all real stuff that has been used. I didn't just make it up.
OK, all right. Christine, you're going to have to be very quick.
Well,
very quick. I'm going to get shouted at here big time.
Where do we get the uranium and the plutonium from, and how easy would it be for, I imagine it's places like China and Russia, for them to stop the supply? I know we don't need a lot, but...
Very quickly, Paul.
Question.
No, it isn't. Of course, those countries do have some supply. There are a variety of countries that have supply of uranium. Typically, it is the likes of Canada, United States, Australia, and some African countries that have the sort of supply that we would be tapping into. So, largely countries that are allies of the UK. Yeah. Plutonium actually comes from the uranium. So it is generated as a byproduct of using uranium in reactors.
Good stuff, but also good luck with getting Trudeau to dig more, I suppose. But Paul, thank you very much. Paul Norman there, of course, Professor of Nuclear Physics and Nuclear Energy at the University of Birmingham and lover of a massive sum. Anyway, coming up, there's been reports this week that the so-called ISIS bride, Shamima Begum, was originally trafficked to Syria by a double agent working for Canadian intelligence and ISIS. I think the second part of that sentence is more important than the first. In 2019, her British citizenship was revoked after she fled the dangerous Badlands of Tower Hamlets to go to the quiet lands of Raqqa. We'll ask whether or not her citizenship should be reinstated. Was she old enough to consent? But now, better late than never. Sorry, Polly, it's time for your headlines.
And the headlines this hour: police investigating the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt Corbell say 2 guns were used during the shooting in Liverpool. They've released CCTV of the gunman running from the scene near the Knotty Ash area of the city. Olivia was killed when he chased his intended target into her home. Detective Chief Superintendent Mark Keeman renewed an appeal for more information.
It is beyond comprehension how anyone could protect or harbour a man who's responsible for killing a 9-year-old child. This man is toxic. He is toxic to our communities, and if you're protecting him, he's toxic to you and your family. I want you to place the loyalty that you have towards your family above the loyalty that you may have to this man.
Meanwhile, Boris Johnson has promised £700 million in funding for the Sizewell C nuclear power station in Suffolk. In his final major policy speech as Prime Minister, he said he was confident it'll get over the line in the next few weeks. Millions of households could face the biggest squeeze in living standards in over a century. The Resolution Foundation says the number of people living in absolute poverty is set to rise by 3 million in the next few years. The think tank warns real household disposable income is on course to fall by 10% over this and next year. Tens of thousands of rail workers will take part in another round of strikes as part of an ongoing dispute over pay. The RMT union has announced industrial action will be staged on the 15th and 17th of September. Yesterday, 2 other unions announced their members will also walk off the job this month. Those are your latest news headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, and it's time to go back to Patrick in just a moment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Now, before we get stuck right into the great Shamima Begum debate, earlier in the programme, we were discussing the Children's Commissioner calling on the next Prime Minister to stop ducking the need for stable families. Have we got too obsessed with this modern diverse family and not people who are actually staying together? Dame Rachel de Souza says that new data suggests a stable family unit has a protective effect, which makes children happier and more successful in the long run. Lots of you have been getting in touch on this as well. David's been on. My wife and I have been together for 45 years, 5 children, 14 grandchildren. Out of all their friends, they are the only ones that have parents who are still together. Then they tell us that they are so proud. My wife and I are the best of friends. I do love that, David, but can I just say, and you've stopped short of this, one thing that really winds me up is when people go, oh, we've been married 45 years and we've never had a row. Well, what a boring life you lead then. What an absolutely, you're either liars or a boring life. But of course, not you, David, who gets on very, very well with his wife. So thank you very much for that. Marion's been on. The Labour Party under Tony Blair brought about the demise of marriage and invented the teeny bopper young mothers without a clue. Interesting stuff. I have been very happily married to a wonderful man, my husband, for 52 years. Get in, here we go. We have 3 children, 3 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren. Without a shadow of a doubt, children are better with marriage. Thank you very much, Marion. I just want to say as well, look, for anyone watching this who's been through a divorce or a breakup, you know, I do understand that sometimes there are clearly some irreparable issues, things like domestic violence or whatever. You know, it's not saying that every single marriage has to stay together. Of course we're not, but Annie's also been on. Nearly every single parent I knew wanted to be in a stable relationship, preferably marriage. but the men don't want to. Single mums can still do a good job, and that's right. These figures that came out earlier on about the number of single-parent families basically show that around 90% of them are led by women, i.e. the men aren't around anymore. Very interesting as well, I thought, the ethnic background here as well to those figures. The numbers when it came to cultural differences of who's in a single-parent background and whose marriage was still together. And actually, interestingly, the lowest percentage of people who were separated, right, was in Asian and Indian families. So only 11% apparently reported not being in a quote-unquote stable marriage, which I thought might bizarrely add to some kind of advert for arranged marriage. But there we go. But we're going to move on from that right now. There's been new revelations, OK, about the so-called ISIS bride, Shamima Begum's journey to Syria with two school friends in 2015. So reports claim that she was smuggled to the Middle Eastern nation by a member of Canadian intelligence who, crucially, but seems to have been overlooked by some other news outlets, was also working with ISIS. Begum controversially had her citizenship revoked in 2019 by then Home Secretary Sajid Javid. He's since come out and said that if we knew what he knew, then you'd make the same decision as well. The decision was appealed on the grounds that she should be allowed back to the UK to fight her citizenship in court, but the Supreme Court, of course, unanimously voted against having her back. So I want to reopen this chat, and there's a few different areas to get stuck into here, and ask whether or not this citizenship should be reinstated. We thought we'd have a good debate on this. So joining me now is Steve Valdad-Simmons from Amnesty International UK. Thank you. Good to see you again, Steve. And, of course, Benjamin Loughnane as well, who is a research fellow at the Bow Group. Before we drill down into this, let's just deal with the overarching issue. I'll start with you, Benjamin. Do you think that she should have her citizenship but brought back now, especially that we found out that someone from Canadian intelligence might have been involved, of course, in taking her to Syria?
No, not at all. Look, as far as I'm concerned, people talk about the legalities, the technicalities, whether she's entitled to this, that, or other. For me, it's an ethical issue. She joined ISIS. She shouldn't be allowed back into this country ever again.
OK, I'll lob it over to you, Steve. I mean, I believe, Steve, that you thought that potentially that she should be allowed back anyway, regardless of the latest revelations of a Canadian spy being involved in her trafficking.
Absolutely. The position that Amnesty takes is that stripping people's citizenship is an extreme thing to do. It's not appropriate in this case, and indeed in many others. If there are issues about whether a British citizen posed some sort of risk or has done something that is wrong, then those are things for our criminal justice system ultimately to be dealt with. We should not be in the business of simply exiling people and casting them off to other parts of the world.
Back into this, Benjamin, maybe we're extreme.
Yeah, you said that Amnesty's position is that stripping citizenship should be only in extreme cases. I mean, I'm not being funny, mate, but she joined ISIS. That's a pretty extreme case, as far as I'm concerned. That's why they call it extremism.
Go on, Steve.
She was a 15-year-old girl who was essentially lured into doing something certainly very foolish, arguably extremely wrong, and potentially very dangerous. The idea that she is then punished for that by having her citizenship revoked is, I'm afraid, barbaric. It is the sort of thing that this country used to do over 150 years ago, when we used to exile people, and we stopped doing that, and we should stop it altogether now too.
So, Benjamin, I'm glad, Steve, that you brought the age thing into this, because this is a massive issue for a lot of people. Benjamin, was she old enough to know what she was doing?
Well, look, at the end of the day, he used the word barbaric. What I think is barbaric isn't stripping her of her citizenship. It's what she was doing over there when she was going around policing people on how they were dressed, stitching suicide bombers into their vests so that they could only leave the suicide vest by detonating the bomb. She carried around a Kalashnikov, so, threatening people. She was a part of an extreme organisation. That's barbaric. Stripping her of her citizenship is protecting people in this country. It's not barbarism. She's the barbaric one.
Steve, on this age issue now, it's a tricky one for a lot of people because, yes, there is such a thing as childhood innocence. There is such a thing as not being fully mentally and emotionally developed and therefore being more easily manipulated, etc. But at the same time, people make mistakes when they're young that do stick with them for the rest of their lives. And joining a radical jihadi death cult is arguably one of those, Steve.
I've no doubt that this will stick with her for the rest of her life, and it would have stuck with her for the rest of her life if, as what should have happened, she had been permitted to return to this country, and if there was anything to prosecute her for, and I have no objection to that, that had happened. But instead what has been done is she has been effectively exiled by her country to another part of the world. I'm sorry to say that whatever she has done, however barbaric what she may have been involved in, does not excuse this country from its own barbarism in rehearsing laws that we abandoned, practices we abandoned centuries ago.
Steve, is there a chance that this particular individual, who we know has been involved in terrorism, who we know has, by her own admission, been helping to stitch suicide bombers into their vests, who we know has been a fully signed-up member of a terror organisation, might come back and then, shock horror, be a terrorist when they're here? Steve?
Well, I obviously cannot answer that. I don't have the information to be able to do so, and it would be perfectly
there's a strong implication,
if there is
Steve,
any risk of that, for steps to be taken to try and address that, just as any person in this country who is British, whom there are concerns about their behaviour and what threat they may or may not be to other people, would be of interest to those authorities that we have to try and control that. That is an appropriate and responsible way of dealing with real issues, I agree. Simply casting people off to other places of the world and no longer taking your responsibilities as a nation, I'm afraid is not a responsible thing to do.
So, I'll bring you back in, Benjamin. Do you think it would be responsible to bring a former member of ISIS back to the streets of the UK?
No, I think it would be grossly irresponsible for the government to bring a known terrorist back into this country and allow them to live here presenting a danger to the people of this country. I think it would be disgusting. And she wasn't just a British citizen, bear in mind, she had dual citizenship. So it's not as though we have a responsibility to her in the same way as we would if she were just a British citizenship. She has just a British citizen, she has other places to go. And the whole idea of, you know, letting terrorists come back, if you set that precedent, we are finished as a country. It just shows the complete collapse of law and order.
Steve, some people would say, yes, Amnesty does a lot of worthy work and stands up for human rights right across the world. What about the human rights of the person who might have to live next door to this potential terrorist?
Well, what about the human rights of whoever is having to live next door to somebody who is cast off? Look, either we take responsibility for our citizens, the people who grow up in our country, who develop whatever dangers or threats they may pose in our country, or we think that it's okay to cast them into the world to other people's places where they may pose a threat to other people. If this were happening the other way around, I dare say Benjamin would be as outraged as he sounds about the idea of people exiling their citizens to our country if they were dangerous. It's no good having things one way and not the other. That really is lawless. We should take responsibility for our citizens, and she is one of them.
Benjamin, do you have sympathy for the people of Syria and Turkey or wherever Shamima is now?
Well, yeah, look, as far as I'm concerned, you know, she went out there, she made a choice to do that. That was her decision. As far as I'm concerned, at the point she joined ISIS, she threw off her citizenship of this country by choice. But she's also, I believe it's Bangladesh that she's a citizen of. Why aren't you calling for Bangladesh to take responsibility for her? You're really saying that it was British values which made her go off and become an extremist terrorist? I don't think so. The idea that she was raised in this country and therefore the way that she turned out is our responsibility is absolute nonsense. She was radicalised by people who have an extremist ideology, and she went out there because the place that she went to fits more in line with her worldview. The reason she left Britain is because she couldn't live the way that she wanted to live in this country, and now the state has collapsed, she wants to come back, she should stay there.
Right, look, both of you, I know we could talk about this forever, and I would indeed love to. Thank you very much, both of you, for a riveting debate there. Of course, Steve Valdez-Symonds, they're, of course, Refugee and Migrant Rights Programme Director at Amnesty International UK, and Benjamin Loughnane, Research Fellow at the Bow Group. I've got no doubt that will get you very, very hot under the collar. So thanks to Steve and Ben. Just a quick apology, actually. I must say I wasn't aware of this at the time, but if you did happen to hear any bad language in the background of that chat, hopefully you didn't. I certainly didn't, but if you did, then we're very, very sorry about it. it if it caused any offence, OK? There we go. Let's see what Christine Hamilton makes of it. Christine is, of course, with me for the next 10 minutes or so.
Well,
go on.
When Shamima was 15, that's one thing, but she while she was away, she reached the age of 18, she then joined ISIS, and she refused to condemn the Manchester bombings, and Steve was talking about the barbaric treatment that this country has meted out to her, as though we were putting her on the rack or in the thumbscrew, for goodness sake. And as Benjamin quite rightly said, she has another citizenship. She should not be allowed back in. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the one thing that does slightly worry me is if this Canadian story is true...
Well, this is it.
Who in our government knew about it, and why didn't we know about it a bit sooner? All that is a bit murky.
Well, it's the question of whether or not that really matters, right, Christine? Because there's no question about the fact that Shamima Begum wanted to join ISIS.
No, I'm not saying...
Go on.
I'm not saying that it affects what I think about her not being able to come, but I just do think that if that is true, then I think I would personally like to know a bit more about it and what our government knew or didn't know.
From what angle? Just about transparency, you mean?
From a transparency, from a security angle. I mean, you know, she was living in this country, and if she was trafficked from here, I think we need to know about that.
OK,
I don't know whether she was or she wasn't.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we are going to have to wrap up shortly, but I think on this, it's not uncommon. In fact, it's actually really common for people to be working both sides, for intelligence services, obviously, to try to penetrate human traffickers, etc. I mean, the IRA, for goodness sake, I mean, is an obvious example of that. And so it's not really beyond the realms of possibility, clearly, that there were a lot of double agents working as human traffickers. So for me, that wasn't really a massive, massive story. It just reignited the idea of whether or not we should allow her back at all.
Definitely
I think the notion that in some way the idea that someone who might have been playing both sides, an intelligence officer working for us and indeed ISIS, why that should in any way bolster Shamima Begum's case to come back to the UK, for me, is a little bit of a nonsense.
No, I wasn't saying it bolsters the case.
Yeah.
No, I just it all sounds a little bit murky, and I just think a little bit more information might be a good thing. But no, she should definitely not be allowed back here.
OK, well, there we go. Well, look, thank you so much. I must say, I've really thoroughly enjoyed having you back on yet again. Christine Hamilton there. Where have these 2 hours gone? Up next is Jubes & Co. with Michelle Dewberry, who's right here in the studio. She sashayed her way in just a bit earlier on. What can we expect from you, Michelle?
Hello. Yes, indeed. Tonight, Sizewell C. Apparently, that is going to be the answer. I laugh at these things because we just go around in circles, don't we? Boris Johnson criticising other people for being short-termist in their thinking. But are all politicians, and isn't that the problem? Anyway, is the answer Sizewell C? That's the question I'm asking tonight. Also, the NHS, apparently, we have to admit, it can't do everything. Some people would say it doesn't really do a good job of doing much at the moment. But what should our national health priorities be when it comes to the NHS? And I heard you talking about it earlier on, Patrick, family.
Yes.
How important is it?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I tell you what, that's going to be an absolute cracker, Michelle, as always. Up next, of course, it is Jubes & Co. with the wonderful Michelle Dewberry. Lots of top topics for you to get stuck into there. Thank you very much, everybody who's been getting in touch and been, of course, tuning in. Lots of you, in fact. On the child migrant crossings in the channel, they've been up 80%, OK? 80%, a shocking number. Rachel says you can't say 80% increase in boats immigrants discovered. There may well be an increase, but the Royal Navy have been monitoring since last year because they have better technology to check. Yes, it wasn't just the people coming over, it was specifically children, actually. Darren's been on. He says it must be nipped in the bud. DNA tests with the people they come with should be done straight away to identify if they are trafficked. I agree with you, Darren. I think it's the bare minimum that we can expect if people want to obviously have come over here and have full benefits of our public healthcare system, our transport system, housing, the education system as well. I think the least we could do is make sure we know who they are. Thank you very, very much, everybody. I've been Patrick Christie's here. Jubes & Co. is next. Christine Hamilton joined me throughout. Thank you very, very much. I will be back tomorrow, filling in 1 until 3 p.m. And yes, some big news for next week coming your way as well. Patrick Christie said thank you very much.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. The weather is definitely on the change. A few more showers around tomorrow. Still, many places will be dry and bright with sunny spells. For many, quite a warm and humid feel. High pressure is still just about holding on, but we're being pushed from both the northwest and the south by weather fronts, both likely to introduce more and more showers as we go through tomorrow. Only one or two showers around this evening and overnight, but still one or two heavy ones across southwest England in particular. And later in the night, we'll see a few more drifting up across southern England once more, maybe into the Midlands, perhaps parts of East Wales. Elsewhere, most places dry, and it will be clear and it's quite cool across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Temperatures down to single figures for some. Some mist and fog patches are also likely, whereas it'll be quite warm and humid to start Friday across the south. Quite a lot of cloud then to begin with for England and Wales. Certainly across central areas and some heavy showers developing. Hit and miss, so no guarantees if you're after rain that you will see much, but where it does rain, I say, the showers could be pretty lively. And the rain turning heavier across western Scotland, the east of Northern Ireland through the day. Much of eastern England, eastern Scotland staying dry and fine with some warm sunshine across the southeast. 27 is possible. Elsewhere, high teens or low 20s. The showers will continue to drift northwards across England and Wales, and the rain will continue to pep up across Northern Ireland.